This is In Character. I'm your host, Gerard Robinson, Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies in Culture Foundation. Hello, everyone. My name is Gerard Robinson. Welcome again to another session of In Character. For those of you who are watching for the first time, and for those of you, of course, who've been here multiple times, you know this is an opportunity for me to speak to educators and leaders across the country to have a conversation about a topic in the field of education. We've covered equity, we've covered diversity, we've covered finance. We've also talked about culture and learning in schools. We've also talked about COVID-19. And in fact, we met with our first group of leaders, maybe just a year ago. And since then, a lot of things have changed in the US. So Catherine and I, who's my partner, we decided to bring together some leaders and have a conversation about COVID-19 and what it's like to lead in a situation like this. The closing of schools across the country was unprecedented. And at the same time, it raised some really dynamic points of difference between race, class, between zip codes, urban and rural. And at the same time, it provided opportunities for educators and leaders to say, you know what, let's just reimagine how we talk about delivering teaching and learning. So with that, let me welcome all of you to In Character. So my first question is real easy. Just tell me first and last name, where you're located right now, and then what attracted you to the field of education. And once we do a round robin, then I'll go ahead and get started with my first question. So David, since I see you closest to me on the screen, let's start with you.
My name is David Morales. I am from Las Cruces, New Mexico. So I'm on the southern part of our state. And I teach at Mayfield High School. What attracted me to education? I wanted to save kids' lives the way my high school history teacher saved mine. She made all the difference in the world, and I wouldn't be here today without her. So she's the reason.
Good shout out to her. We recently celebrated Teachers Week. So belated shout out to that teacher. Let's go to the other David.
Thanks, Gerard. Welcome, everyone. I'm David Lucia. I'm the superintendent of schools in Wellesley, Massachusetts, a district just outside of Boston, where I'm about to start my 10th year. And I chose education back in 1992. It seems like a lifetime ago, because I wanted to change the world. And, you know, much like David indicated, I wanted to have the same kind of impact some great teachers had on my life as well.
Okay. Thank you. Let's go to Cicely.
Hi, I am Cicely Woodward. I teach algebra and geometry at Kickapoo High School in Springfield, Missouri. This is my 17th year teaching, but I spent most of that time teaching in Tennessee, and I'm honored to have been able to serve as the 2018 Tennessee Teacher of the Year. I am just really passionate about believing in kids and believing in the power of education. I want students to be able to walk out of their K-12 experience prepared for whatever they want to do, whether that's go to college or go to the military or start a career or open a business. I just want students to be ready.
Sounds good. Thank you. Let's go to Yoon.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Yoon Romano. I'm an international baccalaureate biology teacher at Strawberry Crest High School. It's part of Hillsborough County School District in Tampa, Florida. It is the 7th largest school district in the country. I am about to transition out of the classroom next year. I'm taking over as the IB coordinator at Alonzo High School. They will be the 5th high school in our district to have the IB program. I got into school primarily because I came over to the United States when I was 5 years old. I'm a Vietnam War refugee. And I came over to the United States a year behind because I didn't understand English. And because of all of my teachers and the American education system, it provided me opportunities. It gave me, the skills that I needed to succeed. And it was because of my teachers. So I really do this job to honor all those educators who have helped me in this country to get where I am, to realize my dreams and my goals.
Hello, I'm Tanya Grimes. I'm superintendent of Southeast Fountain School Corporation in Petersburg, Indiana, a very small rural community in West Central Indiana. I've been in education for almost 35 years, and I went in as a teacher. I've known since I was about 4 years old. I decided I was going to be a teacher, and never once have I wavered from that. Never once have I regretted that. Education has just always been where my heart is. And you know, I grew up in a family. I was a first generation college student and things like that. And it just, so I can't put my finger on one person or one thing that made me want to be a teacher. I knew that from my first day inside of school that I was hooked and wanted to be there forever.
Thank you. Tanya, I'll remember that moving forward. Nanette.
Thank you, Gerard. Hello, my name is Nan Merrell, and I was the 2013 Oregon Teacher of the Year. I'm currently serving in my 7th year of administration, 3 years in the state of Oregon and 3 in Idaho. I'm a principal over a public charter school with college preparatory emphasis. And what drove me to education was I had the pleasure of being an at-home mom for 17 years. And I went back and got my education when my youngest was in preschool, because I learned very quickly that schools had more waking hours with my children than I did. So I wanted to create a classroom and an environment of love and learning where I would want my own children to be. And since I've moved to administration, I work very hard to transfer that lens into an entire building of love and learning. And so I think just being an at-home mom and recognizing the impact that educators had on my children, I wanted to be that positive influence that for others that my children experienced. And I'm excited to participate in this panel this evening.
Thank you. Let's go to Jessica.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Waters. I was with Nanette and the 2013 State Teacher of the Year, representing Rhode Island. I taught biology, chemistry, and physics for many years. And now I serve as the executive director at the Nowell Leadership Academy. We're a small charter school that serves pregnant, parenting, and off-track youth, which is really important to me. When I first came to Nowell as a principal, my sister was a student there. And so I got to see her be the first in our family to graduate high school. Which brings me to why I'm in education. I didn't have that opportunity to graduate high school. I actually dropped out. And unlike my colleague, David, I didn't really have anyone at my high school that was like my person cheering me on not to drop out. And so, you know, my mission has always been to create equitable outcomes for all students, no matter what their background was. My parents were incarcerated, and so I became a statistic to many people. And so that's my life mission, is to make sure that those young people have opportunities.
Thank you. And also thank you for being open enough to share the personal story with us. I'm sure there will be more coming up. Let's go to Jeuné.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeuné Provost. I'm the acting assistant principal at a school in the Virgin Islands. I currently live and work in St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands. I was the 2015 Virgin Islands State Teacher of the Year. Education actually chose me. I come from a long line of educators, both on my mother and my father's side, and I just saw the value in all their hard work, and years passed and students would see them in the grocery store and just talk about the impact that they had on their lives. And so I wanted to continue that legacy, and I think it's super important, especially in my community, to just educate our students, not just academically, but also culturally. And so that's a big part of my mission. So I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Jason.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jason Camrus, the superintendent in Richmond, Virginia, and the 2005 National Teacher of the Year. First, let me apologize for my informal attire. We had a teacher appreciation event, so just coming from that. I entered education because I really love working with kids, and it makes me really frustrated when some kids don't have access to a really great education. And more often than not in this country, that has a lot to do with race or how much money your family has or what country you come from or what language you speak at home. And that just doesn't sit well with me. So I've committed myself to trying to do everything I can to change that, because I think all kids really deserve a great education.
Thank you. Just by a show of hands, a friend of mine is a preacher's kids. We call him a PK. How many TKs do we have? Teacher's kids? Show of hands. Okay, so 1, 2. Okay. And so I often ask this question, not all the time, just to get an idea of how many are following the line. So the two people here at the bottom, in terms of Richmond and Virgin Islands, following that piece. So let me throw the first question out to the principals. Again, what we've seen take place is just unprecedented. And you as a class, as a school-based leader, talk to us about, were you hybrid? Were you out for the last several months? How did you manage working with your educators in terms of keeping them not only encouraged, because we talked oftentimes about the trauma and the stress that students were going through. Teachers were going through the same thing. And so just talk to us about how you led through a situation like this. First one's for the principals. You can go in whatever order you'd like. So I got a call on people.
I love to start. It was very challenging to not only support our students, but also support our teachers. We found that it was imperative to have counseling sessions available for our teachers throughout the process, in just setting up or getting ready, because our school was not prepared to go 100% digital. So that was definitely a challenge, and the infrastructure in the Virgin Islands did not necessarily support that large amount of technology on grid. So that definitely was a challenge. But also, you know, you take into consideration the pandemic in itself, both psychologically and physically, was challenging for the community as a whole. So it was definitely very challenging. I think the greatest lesson that I've learned from it is to be flexible, even more so. I think in education, we know we have to be pliable, but even more so during this time, to be flexible.
The counseling sessions that you had with educators, all virtual? Was there some in person or something in the middle?
We did do collective group sessions virtually. Those were provided by an outside counseling therapist clinic. And then we did offer in person for small groups as well as individual therapy was offered to teachers.
Okay, thank you.
I'll answer that for myself. I worked in one district half the year this year, and then became a superintendent in another district in the middle of the year, in the middle of COVID and the schools being closed down. So it was a rebuilding, getting my schools opened back up in January and trying to get as much in person. But as I mentioned earlier, we're also a very small rural district. So I knew that it was really important that we do that, because many of our families did not have reliable internet connection. And so we were juggling between trying to get packets out to those families and getting hotspots out to those families, and you know, just trying anything and everything to make those connections. And it's just been a tremendous challenge, but you know, I have a fabulous staff who just do whatever it takes to help our kids succeed. So so we've just been trying to think out of the box at every step of the way. And I'm happy to say we're at the last week of school and we're back face to face and making it here to the end with our kids sitting in classes. So that's been helpful.
Well, speaking of hotspots, again, you mentioned you're in a rural area. How did you make it happen? I know some places you used a bus, some delivered boxes. What did you guys do?
A number of things. First of all, some of our area churches and other community spots had hot spots and families took their kids there, but we also worked with some of our local internet providers that we could purchase portable hotspots. And for those families that could use those, we took those. But even some of our families are so rural that even those devices were not really helpful. So if they were unable to get to a place that we had more of a community hotspot, then for those families, we had to do some packet work and things like that, unfortunately.
Oh, thank you.
Gerard, I would jump in and build off of some of Tanya's comments. You know,
Sure.
I think for superintendents at a district level, you know, wearing multiple hats is sort of part of the job. I think this year, or frankly, the last year and a half, and that's been part of the challenge. It really didn't feel like there was a break between the 1920 and 2021 school year. It just felt like one continuous year. But that meant assuming a number of different roles. You know, I think number one, managing a ton of anxiety from students, from parents, from staff, trying to interpret changing guidance coming from the federal and the state level, sometimes contradictory. I don't know how many times over the year I've said we're awaiting further guidance on a particular issue. Very different expectations sometimes from parents who weren't happy with what they were seeing, and trying not to pit teachers against parents and trying to bridge that divide. You know, our district was one of the first to institute a weekly viral testing program. So I've always been a part-time meteorologist in New England, but this required a whole different level of scientific acumen and just lots and lots of communication through webinars, through messages, trying to navigate that uncertainty. So, you know, I think a massive exercise in managing the unknown in terms of what was happening and trying to be as clear about those things as possible. It's felt like it's been like that for quite a long time now.
I know a little about your system in part from grad school work, but also friends who live in that area. In many of the areas, you had not only town and gown dynamics, which often we overlook, but you also had class and income dynamics. Some families who have means to do X, Y, and Z, and families who do not. And yet they're both in your system. How did you navigate some of the dynamics that played out either through town gown, but also through income and class?
Yeah, it required a lot of outreach to families. You know, I think for a majority of our families, they wouldn't have assumed there'd be families that might be experiencing that digital divide with in terms of internet broadband access, or who rely on our schools for lunch. So they were quite surprised at the amount of work we had to do to provide meals to students, or to think about getting devices out there, or working with our local cable company to ensure broadband for those families who, you know, might not be in the sight lines of other folks. So there was definitely a level of differentiation, but also wanting to do that discreetly, so as not to, you know, raise the profile of those individuals. I think that sensitivity was always there as well.
Thank you.
I will share next, if you don't mind.
Sure. Oh no, absolutely, Jessica.
Yeah, we closed school on March 13th, and I had enough years of science behind me to know it was going to be the rest of the year. So we immediately sent home that Friday every student that was on campus with a computer, and we sent home all of the Wi-Fi boxes that we had. Then the next week, our state went on school vacation. They moved the vacation up, but we didn't. We work with the most vulnerable population in the state, and we couldn't afford to do that. So we committed to working that following week, and we got the rest of the Wi-Fi boxes out and the rest of the computers out to students who weren't there. And from day one, I felt like it was my job to make lots of decisions very swiftly, even though they might not be the right ones, or there was things I didn't know, but I had to make those decisions, and also to absorb and remove the chaos that was happening around us from teachers. Because if they were chaotic, we were not going to have any instruction happening. And so that really paid off. And we actually gained in almost every metric during this year. And we, you know, that's a lot. My staff really leaned in this time. And our students, we flipped our model. So we had virtual instruction, and that stayed virtual. So we could create systems and consistency. And our on-campus life was with your primary person, mentoring, school counseling. Our daycare was open from day one for our students to bring their babies. All of the mental health services, special education services, multilingual learner services, everything that was a support for a student, students could come to campus as many times as they would want during the week to receive those services. And all of our instruction remained virtual. And from March 13th, we have had every single day, I lead a whole school community huddle, where that really kept tears and joy and storytelling and kept us really close as a community. And so we had a lot of hurt and sadness, but we also experienced a lot of learning and bright spots and joy.
And you have a unique population of having moms with children, which adds another dynamic that we often do not discuss. I'll come back to that. Jason, since I see you in the picture, what about the capital city?
Well, I'll echo just about everything that my colleagues have already said. It feels like we have been reinventing school nonstop for about a year and a half, and I've just been so incredibly impressed by our teachers and our principals and family members and community. Everybody has just stepped up in incredible ways. You know, we were a school system on March 13th, 2020 that had about 3,000 laptops for about 23,000 kids. Today we're 1-to-1. And so it was a pretty radical jump into the 21st century with not just the Chromebooks, but also hotspots, as you've heard. And we also had to rethink not just instruction, but also things like food. So for the last year, we've been running our bus fleet every morning, not to pick up kids, but to drop off food at hundreds of bus stops all across the city, so that our kids can eat every day. So it's truly been a pretty remarkable shift. I think your original question was about sort of morale and kind of keeping everybody supported. And, you know, one of the things we did back in March of 20 was we started publishing daily shout outs to staff who were doing great things. And it became so popular that we've done it every day since then. So I've got 500 single spaced lines of 500 pages of single spaced shout outs to teachers and bus drivers and custodians and nutrition staff over the last 18 months. And I know it sounds like a small thing, but it's really been a huge morale booster and something that the whole community has come together. So lots of other things, but that's just one I thought I would mention.
Okay, appreciate it.
Piggyback off of Jason and Jessica, because we did very similar things. I too led a huddle starting last March every single day, just trying to keep morale up. There was, you know, we actually had staff comment that they actually see everybody every day, which prior to COVID, they might pass them in the hall, but starting each morning with a Zoom huddle, they were able to interact. Usually the morning ones were shout outs or next steps. And then we always had one towards the end of the day, 3 times a week, that was more just fun, more team building, more, social emotional, learning. It was difficult. So in the March of 2020, we moved to online schooling, but it was really emergency schooling. We had an LMS system in place that navigated quickly to that, but it was emergency schooling because we didn't see it coming. There's no crisis management plan for COVID. And then we spent the summer and even that spring knowing more than likely in the fall that we would be starting in the same method, either online, hybrid, or face-to-face, so that we could actually have some increased learning. I think we kept learning at the highest level we possibly could in the spring of 2020, but really worked hard to put stronger systems in place going into this current school year. And I think the hardest part as a leader was, recognizing the social emotional learning and how important that it was to have a pulse on relationships, not only with staff, but with scholars. And then this year, identifying that balance between grace and accountability, having grace of where everybody was at, but recognizing we still have to educate kids and have high expectations. And so how do you find that balance and, keep the learning at the best possible way for scholars, and yet upholding staff who are doing nearly the impossible?
Yeah. Let's turn to our remaining guests. Yoon, let's go to you. Same question.
Wow. As a classroom teacher, I think we wore lots of hats this year, IT being one of them. So this year in my classroom, I did hybrid. So I had face-to-face students all year, plus I had all e-learning too. So I was teaching with physical students in front of me while teaching students at home. So in my classroom with my IT hat on and my production direction, setting up things, I had 2 large TV monitors, 1 laptop pointing to the classroom with Zoom so that my students, the physical students, could see the Zoom students, so they felt like they were able to connect with their peers, to have some type of relationship, put a name, put a face to it, and interact with them. I had 1 camera pointing towards me on when I'm doing my presentation, so that when I'm teaching the face-to-face, the children at home are able to interact and see the same lesson, whether I'm drawing something or I'm modeling something. Labs were you had to get really creative. So then that I had to bring in my Surface, and it was on had to make sure it was charged every day, and I would take it from lab table to lab table, and they would have the groups at home would interact with the groups that were actually doing the physical lab. So then the students at home were actually doing the data collection. They were reading the procedures, making sure that the students in the classroom were following the procedures, catching mistakes. So it was very creative this year. But I think in terms of the relationships that the students learn or had with one another, I think it ended on a positive note. They had, we laughed a lot during class. I think this year for classroom teachers, we were trying to be normal in abnormal times. And it took a lot of creativity in order to achieve that.
Thank you. David, and then we'll go to Cicely.
It was an incredibly challenging year and a half. And it's been an amazing ride, and it filled with huge climbs and huge dips. In our district, we lost several teachers. Some of them were my friends due to COVID, and that was devastating. So when we're talking about the trauma experienced by teachers, absolutely. And then, so in March, we went virtual. So we went right into spring break. They moved spring break up for us. All right, we're going to take a week off, and then it turned into 3 weeks, and then. So, trying to get the kids back, trying to get everything online and taking care of, all our kids' needs. The kids that, I live in a right on that line of urban and suburban, you know what I mean, or urban and rural, actually. So if you look left out my high school window, you'll see nothing but farmland. If you look right, you see the city. It's literally where we're at. So when we have these kids with so many diverse needs, I was really impressed with how our district, again, so I'm the 2016 New Mexico Teacher of the Year. And our district really went out of its way to make sure that our kids had everything they needed. And just like Jason said, we went from a district that was nowhere near having a device per kid to right now, we have enough devices for every kid. Now, that doesn't mean that every kid has a device at home right now, because now we're face to face, and similar to what Yoon said, I have a nice little camera that tracks me in class. I love it. So while I'm teaching, I'm doing the same thing Yoon is. I have my Zoom kids on and I live stream. I tell them I live stream my classes, and I teach the kids that are in front of me while I'm still teaching the kids that are at home. But that's become incredibly challenging, because in the course that I teach, I'm the enlace teacher. So it's engaging Latino communities for education. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is developing those relationships so that we create this web that if somebody falls off, they land in that web and that netting that saves us all. So building those relationships and creating that community, for me as a teacher, I felt like I wasn't doing enough. I just wasn't reaching the kids. So for our final exam for this year, because our last day is tomorrow, and I don't mean to be excited, but man, I got to tell you, I love my kids. I love them, but I want to put a pin in this year and start fresh in the fall. So for our final, we decided that we were going to do something non-traditional, and we came up with questions, and all the kids, all 150 kids in the program put in questions, and we created a 25 question exam based on their questions, and they were so incredibly insightful. How did the pandemic change you? How did you grow? Is there any way that, this impacted you positively? And to hear their words, although it was really challenging and so much went wrong, a lot of my kids came out of it saying, I would do it again because I grew so much as a human. I did things that I didn't know that I could do. And with the population that we work with, what ended up happening is as soon as we went into remote learning, everybody got a job. They went to work to help their families because somebody got laid off, something happened. So being remote and being able to have that flexibility really helped a large chunk of my population. But as a teacher, it was really nice to see that reinforced in their comments at the end, considering that I really didn't feel like I had that kind of impact with it. So yeah, thanks.
No, and thanks for sharing the out of school time reality about employment.
Yeah,
a lot of families lost jobs, and people, their children are kicking in. Cicely, last but not least, your story.
So I started at a district that's new to me in the fall, in August. And when we started school, the students were coming 2 days a week. So I saw about half of my students on Monday and Tuesday, the other half on Thursday and Friday. And then Wednesday was a virtual day for everyone. So we were able to teach and learn virtually on Wednesdays. Several months later, in the early part of the second semester, we switched from a 2-day-a-week schedule to a 4-day-a-week schedule. And so all of the students were coming on Monday and Tuesday and Thursday and Friday. And to backtrack to the 2 days, the premise was that we would have these smaller groups of kids with us, and it would be easier to socially distance. And so when we switched to that 4-day-a-week schedule where everybody was together all at the same time, of course, there was a lot of anxiety from teachers, from students. Is it time yet? Are we really safe? Can we really do this? And so there was this focus on cleaning. We were cleaning between every class, which was not the case, of course, pre-pandemic. I also found a culture shift in what we were able to accomplish in class. Before the pandemic, my students would use lots of manipulatives, things that they touched and felt. It reminded me of the labs that Young talked about, things that they touched and felt. And then we did lots of projects together in small groups and students talking to each other. And then we come back to school these 2 days a week in masks with only half of them there. And it was really challenging to create that kind of engaging environment. It was a challenge to figure out, how do I get these kids to engage with each other when they don't want to talk very much? It was just not the same energy. How do I get them to engage with learning in a way that is meaningful to them when they don't get to touch the same sorts of things that they were doing before? And so that was definitely a big challenge for us. After the 4-day-a-week schedule, we had yet another change in schedule because our administrators really wanted to see students in class every day. And so once again, about midway through the second semester, our students are in class now 5 days a week. And so, of course, social distancing is out of the window, but our students still wear masks. They're still cleaning between every class. But I do feel like they are engaging with each other a little more. They get to see all of their friends together. I also feel like another victory that I've seen is that because, everyone has technology, there's this one-to-one now, and everyone knows how to access their assignments online. That was not a priority before the pandemic. It was, if a student was absent because they were sick or they went on a sports trip or whatever, then they came back and they got caught up. Well, now, if my students are quarantined because they came in contact with somebody with COVID, or they get sick themselves, they know how to access their assignments. They know how to say, hey, Dr. Woodard, can you set up a Zoom room so that I can be in class with everybody else? Because I can't be there physically, I can be there virtually. And so I believe that those kind of things, the kind of tools, technology tools that students have learned throughout the year will carry us on and carry us into next year and beyond, because they are equipped to handle when they can't be there at school physically.
Thank you for sharing that story. Jessica mentioned in her school, she talked about assessments and she's seen some growth. How many of you have decided to either hold harmless for this year, or did you decide we're going to still assess and keep those scores for that school available, or something in the middle? Because this is something that we talk a lot about, or I hear a lot about in the news. What's actually taking place in the real world and how this is working? Anyone can jump in, teacher, superintendent, or principal.
So we chose to continue to assess this school year. And, when they were online, it was assessing, using the LMS system. And for our younger scholars, that was not easy, because you always see the parent on the side of the screen providing, answers. And so what was the validity in that? But then once we moved back to face-to-face, we have continued to test. We went ahead and participated in our regular diagnostic benchmarks, as well as the state assessments, and data is rolling in. We also use the NWA MAP data, and we are actually pretty pleased, quite pleased actually, with the results. Our ELA results are stronger than the local school district, and our math are stronger than the local school district, not as strong as we would like them to see. And I think it goes back to, I think it was Cicely that mentioned manipulatives and, the hands-on piece. That was not as accessible when we were not face-to-face. But we went ahead and assessed. We needed to make sure that learning was taking place, and COVID is unpredictable. So we have high hopes going into this next school year, but we needed to know where our scholars were at so that we could provide the best support we could. And we used that data all year long, making adjustments. When we were online, we made small groups to meet, to get intervention or extra support where needed. So we in Idaho have continued to assess, at least at Gym Prep.
Thank you.
As far as in the classroom, specifically for ID, we started in May, when we were getting word about whether we were going to do in-person testing for their battery of IB exams, which we have been preparing these students for. Our IB program is a 4-year program in Tampa. 2 of them are officially, they are IB students. And so we have been preparing them for a long time to take these battery of IB exams to get their diploma. And initially, with our data, IB said, yes, they are going to sit and take all of their IB exams. And then it changed. Things, flip-flop around. Data, was discussed, and concerns from the parents, concerns from the students. And so the next thing we knew, IB exams were canceled. So now our IB scores are based on internal assessments. So for me, it was their IA. We have a lot of acronyms, internal assessments. So in biology, it is really for them to come up and design, implement, do statistical analysis, conclusions, literature review for an actual scientific experiment. So for my students, their grade is based on that, plus based on past record, performance of my IB students, and also predicted scores that I give my students as well. So that kind of changed a little bit from the traditional route of getting an IB diploma. So that's what happened in our district. In terms of our overall district, we see a lot of issues with the proficiency going down in reading and math, especially in younger students. And I think with our district this year, in terms of that, they're offering a summer bridge program. They are implementing it at more sites. They're also providing transportation for these families as well. So there's things that the district has put in place to help with the students in terms of getting the gains that they need that they missed out during this pandemic. But as far as personal assessments, I still assess my students as if they were in the classroom. I still have that high expectation for them, but along with that high expectation that I have for my students, I'm still their cheerleader, as a lot of my colleagues are. We expect you to reach this bar, and we will help you reach that bar. We won't take a lot of excuses, but we will help you. We'll be your cheerleader. We understand that there are personal situations that occurs. It occurs with everybody during this type, in this unusual time. And we do make exceptions in terms of assessments, and we give you a second chance. Sometimes we give you a third chance, because at the end of the day, all we want you to do is really learn.
Thank you for sharing. So here's a follow-up question. We know that there have definitely been some dynamics and differences as relates to race. One group of students, a number of families asked me about, are students with disabilities. And I'm on the board of Respectability. It's a nonprofit organization headquartered in Maryland. And part of what we do is to advocate for 55+ million adults and children who have an identified disability. How have you worked with students who have a disability? Some of them may or may not have been in your class or on campus before, for a host of reasons. Many of them have not. What do you say when parents raise that question?
Well, within our district, we've really tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for our students, as well as remaining within the guidelines. We continuously did IEP reviews as necessary, made sure that those students took home manipulatives. So those resources were provided to those students, and a lot of guidance from our special education department and support for our teachers. Though that population in our district, we don't have, particularly at my school, any self-contained classrooms. So a lot of students do resource. It's challenging in that we would have to ensure that that particular teacher was in the virtual class during the time that the student was in that class. And so, breakout rooms, like the best thing since sliced bread. And just, learning that technology too is very important for our teachers and administrators being able to toggle between the regular classrooms and going into those breakout rooms. So it was essential for us to maintain, like I said before, a sense of security for those students, as well as ensuring that we were following their IEP.
Okay, thank you.
We wanted to make sure that our students were able to have all of their necessary accommodations. And so I, as a teacher, as a gen ed teacher, I've been working really closely with special ed teachers to make sure that those students are getting what they need when they need it. And so we did not want those ideas to go away, even though we were so focused on other things like keeping students safe and keeping people from getting sick. We wanted to make sure that those students could still get everything that they needed in order to be successful in the classroom, whether that was time in a small group setting so that they could work on skills, or being able to take their tests in another setting. We just wanted to make sure that they had all of the accommodations that they needed in order to be successful. Extra time. All of my students have the opportunity to retake tests and quizzes. They have a chance to use their resources. So we're really big on making an interactive journal in our math classes, and my students use those all the time. They know how, and they know how to ask questions. They know how to make sure that they are getting what they need. And we are also checking in with students quite a bit. Students who may fall behind, we're making sure that they know what's expected and they know how to reach that high expectation bar. And then we're right there with them, cheering them along, believing in them. That belief is so important. Believing that they can do this, and they often rise to those expectations.
Thank you.
To piggyback off of what Dr. Woodward said, one of the great things, I mean, everything she said, absolutely yes, but one of the things that I really loved, I shouldn't say loved, one of the things I really liked that we're able to do now that I didn't have a chance to do before is showing up to all those IEP meetings, because they're on Zoom. So now I can meet parents a lot more, because usually it's during class, and if I don't have cover and all of that good stuff, being able to sit down and talk to parents and explain to them, hey, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is how we can support your student, and what else can we do for your student? And getting that direct feedback, not only from parents, but from the students themselves, because sometimes they don't advocate for themselves, right? In that space with their peers, that safe space that's created in that IEP in a small group setting, it's been a godsend. And a lot of my peers who are our colleagues who are special ed teachers are singing the praises of, I'm getting a lot more gen ed teachers to attend these meetings, and we're getting a lot better feedback, and our kids are advocating for themselves at a higher level now. So, absolutely, I think that environment has been a blessing, and that we didn't know we needed.
It's actually a good point that through the pandemic, one of the spillover effects in a good way is you actually get a chance to participate in the discussions about the IEP and others, because as you mentioned, for a host of reasons, you would not find yourself there. Here's a bigger question. So let me throw this one first to David, and go to Tanya, and then to Jason. You've got a tough job as a system-wide leader. And everybody in the system thinks, our superintendent's doing a great job, or they're not doing a great job. We got 3 people from 3 different sections. Knowing what you know today, what would you have told yourself a year from now in terms of, moving your district forward with something new about teaching and learning that you've learned over the last, I guess almost a year? David, we'll start with you, and we'll move over.
Whew, that's a tough question. A year ago, I don't know that we would have envisioned how long a period this would have been.
Yeah.
And so I think, initially we were thinking this might be something a bit shorter term. I think I would have prepared for last spring, especially when, no one was in person at all. There was no hybrid. Everything was fully closed. And our state told us to hold tight. they were going to define 85 to 90% of what the reopening in the fall was going to look like. And so we actually welcomed that news because the approach was so idiosyncratic in Massachusetts. You know, each community is its own school district. So there are 350 plus school districts in the state, and it was incredibly fragmented, which led to, you know, all sorts of equity issues. So, you know, having a singular approach to unify us was something we all looked forward to. The state, I think, facing political pressure in the middle of the summer, said, actually, we want you each to develop your own plans that you want to submit to the state, and tell us what a full reopening would look like, what a hybrid would look like, and what a remote had looked like. So I think I would have begun that process much earlier on and defined it ourselves rather than waiting for the state, because the opportunity cost of that was just so significant. It also meant that we were rushing into pretty challenging. We haven't talked about union negotiations. All this had to be bargained in Massachusetts, every bit of this. So regardless of what the state was saying, we had to go to the bargaining table in August and go through that entire process. So I think we would have begun that a lot earlier. I think we would have put our testing program, our viral testing program, we would have sorted through that much sooner and had that ready to go. So, you know, I think everything just in hindsight feels like I wish we could have done that sooner. I wish we would have known that piece then, which at the time, you know, none of us knew even weeks ahead what things were going to look like necessarily. So I think it's, you know, it's hard to look back and feel like I would know what all those choices would be like, because we didn't have all the information at our fingertips at that point.
No, and everything you share is exactly the kind of stuff that we're looking to hear. And I believe that those who are watching or will listen will be shocked to know there's over 300 school districts in one state. So that'll be another aha moment for some people. Jason, let's go to you. Same question.
I guess I don't know so much if it would have been differently. I think it would have been similar to what David said, I would have told myself, hey, this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. So I remember like these intense meetings when we were like, should we close for 2 weeks? And it was like, you know, a lot of hand wringing. And when we decided we were going to do it, like, you know, we had the school board and the mayor and everybody. It was a big press conference because like 2 weeks, that had never, ever happened before. Here we are a year and a half later. So I think I would have just warned myself, hey, there's a long road ahead. So you got to kind of mentally prepare for that. I think like many folks on the call, and I can't remember if it was David who said it or one of the other superintendents, but, you know, I imagine most people on the call have not really taken any serious vacation since March 13th. I know I haven't. And it's just felt like one long stretch. I am thrilled to be able to take the week of July 4th off this year. I decided finally it was time. But it's been long. It's been long for teachers. It's been long for families. It's been long for kids. It's for everybody. And so I think that would have been the one thing I would have given my March 2020 self a heads up for, just to mentally and emotionally and physically prepare for that.
So for those of you who couldn't see, when Jason made the point about he hadn't had a vacation, there were not only finger snaps, but some passing of adult beverages across the screen, just for the record on that one. Tanya, let's go to you with the same question.
So one of my favorite quotes, and I'm going to paraphrase, is Maya Angelou: do the best you can until you know better, and then do better. And I think I've had to remind myself of that more times than I care to count since March of 2020. You know, we turned on a dime and did the best we could in the spring. And then we got that little reprieve during summer break. And like Jason, I call it break lovingly, but I have not taken a break because I spent that time regrouping, looking at what worked and what didn't work and how we could do it differently to move forward. And then we moved into the new school year in August, trying to make things a little better. We had to change. Our district also was not one-to-one. You know, we got devices. We had to get a learning management system. We had to figure out how to train teachers and students on that while they were remote, and all of those things. And it was a continued learning process. So if I were to give myself advice now, and I think that was your original question, it would just be, just breathe, you know, just keep moving forward, learn from what worked and how I can do it better, and learn from those things that didn't work so well. What can we do differently so that we can continue to move our students forward, and also to continue to support, you know, I think that the social emotional learning piece was just as important, if not more important, throughout this whole pandemic, not only for my students, but for my staff, because they were going through this too. And they also are carrying that secondary trauma of what they're seeing their students struggle with, and feeling some days helpless because they couldn't put their arm on their shoulder and just pat them on the back and say, I'm right here with you. They were looking through a screen like we are today. And that made it that much tougher. But I can honestly say we are much stronger today than we were last week or last month, and definitely than last year. And it's because we know better and we keep doing better. And I am, you know, if this continues, and I hope it doesn't, into next school year, I just know we're going to get stronger and stronger because we keep learning those lessons.
Thank you. Nanette and Jessica, same question.
You know, I think one of the things that I would tell myself a year ago was that scholars are amazing and they're incredibly resilient. The social emotional learning has been difficult. It's been difficult to watch. It's been difficult, you know, to support. But our scholars, even our little kinders, have become independent, self-aware learners that I guess I wasn't aware that they could do, you know? And so I think pushing them and recognizing that they're able to do it, and for myself, just trusting that. Sure, we absolutely, like everybody else has said, we made some mistakes along the way and we learned a ton and we grew a ton. But the ability of kinders, even online, clear up to our 12th graders, they can do amazing things. And I would give myself a pep talk, you know, back in March of 2020, that if you build it, they will come, I guess, because they just, we did the best we could and they rose to the occasion every single time.
Thank you, Nanette. Thank you, Jessica.
I guess there's two things that keep coming to mind. One is I talked a little bit how I would be super decisive. I'd be like, okay, we're doing this and we're doing this. And then behind the scenes, I would be like agonizing, like, oh my God, did I do the right thing? I'm gonna, like, someone's gonna die and it's gonna be on my hand, like literally like agonizing over these thoughts, and nobody really knew. So I would go back and tell myself, like, stop doubting yourself, like make that decision, move forward, and stop sort of agonizing about it. That's one. And two would be, we had such a good spring, like that we were really being sort of thoughtful about our students. They're older, they were called to work, many of our students, like I think David mentioned, and we and our students were the decisions that were made around having confidence that they can do both work and school in this like virtual way at night and like office hours, that they were actually going to be able to do more work, right? And so students were like, I can graduate this year because I can take, you know, 2 or 3 classes now because I don't have to be necessarily logged into that class. I can do all of this work. And we just fell like flat on our face in Q1, and we had to like really regroup and look at the data that had happened in September, October, and like quickly changed and said, no, we're going back to like a smaller load, go deeper, our pathway that we were already on. And that not really, kids were really stressed trying to work, take care of their kids and family, and then think that they were gonna like log in and do schoolwork all night. It was really unrealistic. So I would go back and I would fix that thing that happened in September, and I would tell myself not to keep doubting the decisions that I was making.
Thank you. Cicely and Yoon.
I would remind myself that even though we're in a pandemic, students still need connection. And we've talked a lot about this tonight, but they need to feel connected to their teachers. They need to feel connected to each other, even to themselves and to school. They need to feel like they belong. Before the pandemic, I used to do what I would call circle time. And we did it once a week. We did it on Mondays. It was our way to reconnect right after a weekend. We'd all stand in a circle and I would pass around this little toy and everybody had a chance to answer a question that had nothing to do with math. It always had something to do with themselves or their experiences or their identities. And my students really loved that. And we only did it once a week. Well, after the pandemic, after we started this year and I was seeing kids first just twice a week, then of course 4 times, and then every day, we started doing circle time every single day. Now, we didn't stand in a circle, we didn't pass around a toy, but I gave every student a chance to answer. I called their name, I posed this question, I gave them a chance to think about it, I called each student's name, and they each had a chance to say something or to pass. Passing was always an option. And students shared some things that I really just did not expect for them to share. And they listened to each other. And I remember one time specifically, a student talked about the fact that she had just moved to our school from California. It was her first day there. She had never been in the state. And right after she shared that, we went to lunch, because we went to lunch in the middle of class and came back. And one of my students came up privately and said, and asked to change her lunch seat because she wanted to be able to sit by this student who was new to this school. She didn't want her to be alone. And to me, we just had all of these opportunities, and these students created so much empathy for each other. They showed and displayed so much empathy for each other as a result of being able to feel connected. And so I guess I would remind myself back in March that even though school is gonna be very different, they still need to feel connected to each other, to themselves, to teachers, and to school.
Thank you.
Boy, something that I reflective on, assessments. So I'm gonna get down to the dirty part here of doing virtual teaching and the difficulty of it. That's not like, roses and sunshine and unicorn glitter here. When this whole thing started, and with our students, everything is just so high stakes, because of that IB diploma that they're working so hard to achieve at the end of the year. And it's not just me, my colleagues and I talk about that as well. At the beginning of the year, when we assess them, when we give them assessments online, we really didn't think about what's going to happen like later on down the road. And I wish we would have gone back and actually, if we could turn back time, perhaps we could do it. Think about another creative way to do it. Because with our students, we have that the snip and copy and clip, whatever term, different platforms call it different things, screenshots. And when we give students assessments, we transitioned at the beginning of the year with hybrid learning, with technology. We in our district, we also had to learn a new platform at the same time. And so everything that we did the year before, we had to translate it into this platform. And so the stress level of teachers in the classroom to learn quickly this new platform, to change everything. And at the same time doing everything else. And again, trying to keep it normal in an abnormal time. The assessment piece, I didn't really think about it at that time because assessments, giving them a grade, giving them feedback was just something that we just had to do, you know? And now at the end of the year, we're all sitting there going, oh my gosh, all those assessments that we gave, we have to redo them. Every single high-stake labs, high-stake assessments, quizzes, essays, every single subject, every single one of us teach, we now have to spend that time and redo. How do you, wow, and we struggle with that. We talk about that and we stress over it because the answers are out there. Those snapshots of those assessments and we can't control them. Like, I'll give you a really good example. Like for me with labs, when I give my students lab assignments to do, those lab work that they get, I hold on to those labs. Those labs are not disseminated. All those labs are out, every single one of them. And there are so many ways that you can ask a question about cell respiration. There are so many questions you can ask about mitosis and cancer and stuff. Now, I wrap my brain and my colleagues as well, history. How many different ways can you ask the question? How can you assess this piece? Because that's the problem now on our end, is how do we make it where going forward, that assessment piece, the feedback is going to be valid. It's going to be a reliable indicator of what they learn. And so that's where the problem is. And if we had, and again, it was just because we were just thrown into this. Okay, well, you have to do this and you have to do this and, figure this out and figure that out. And oh, by the way, here's a new platform. Switch to this new platform. Yeah, that's tough.
Okay.
And like I said, I'm transitioning out of the classroom, but seriously, for like the past month, I was stressed about how we're going to change the way we do our lessons for upcoming classes. So.
Thank you. Let's go to Jeuné and then we'll.
I think for me, I really, I've always believed that in education, we should look at the entire child, take a holistic approach to teaching and learning. And it has become even more apparent now with virtual learning in that it really has to do with every part of the child. We talked about socially emotional learning. We also talked about parents, and that was definitely a key piece because now we sent these students home with these parents who are not prepared to be teachers. And I think had we had thought about that before and really paid more attention to how we could support parents, I think that would have helped, at least in our district, a lot. So I think if I had anything to tell myself going in last March, and this is at the end of my community surviving 2 hurricanes, 2 category 5 hurricanes within 2 weeks of each other.
Yeah. And
then not having electricity from us another 6 months, and then finally coming back to some sense of normalcy, and then COVID. So we've had, parents were already struggling from that situation, and then to this, so not just worrying about where food is going to come from, but now they're also worrying about how to help and educate their children. I think that should have been a major focus for our school and our community. So I think that's what I really wanted to focus on, was how can we support our parents? Because if we support our parents, and we really can support our students.
Thank you. David.
I think for myself, it would be to remind, to say that we can still create that safe space for kids. That although it's virtual, that although it's distant, that although it's challenging, that we can still be that place where they can come and drop off those things that they need to drop off so that they can, step out into the world and do those great things that they're going to do later. That they, I don't know. I mean, my kids noticed one day that I was really sad because nobody was participating in the Zoom class. And they made little signs for me the next day and said, cheer up. And when you can create that kind of space for kids to be able to do that for you, and you bring that energy, and if you continue to do that, things are going to be okay. And that, even when they're not, if we're there for each other, and that we can support each other and push each other and challenge each other and hold each other to high standards, the way Yoon said, we're going to be all right. But in March of 2020, I did not feel any of that. And I wish somebody would have, I wish I could go back and say, dude, just work, man. Put in the work, give them your energy, and it's going to be okay. But man, I wish I could go back and say that.
Well, I want to thank all of you for sharing the what ifs, and I wish I could have, because often in positions of leadership, when you're in the classroom, in a school building, or at the district level, we don't often have to take time to do that. So thank you for sharing it. I mean, there's several things I'm taking away myself. Well, we're going to end now, but I want to just leave all of you with one question. As a leader, you often have to bear the cost, and at times bear the cost. And all of you said in your own way that the reason you're in the education profession is to change the world. One thing that we often do as leaders is we don't take time not only to take care of ourselves, but often we'll take care of others before we allow others to take care of us. So I'll just go around and just tell us, we the people, we the parents, we the staff, we the taxpayers, what's the one thing that we can do to support you where you are right now? David, since I started with you earlier, Superintendent David, I should say, what can we do for you?
Stay off of social media.
Right.
Have some patience.
Okay.
Don't be so quick to judge, and don't assume you have all the information, and tell the educators what a great job they've done.
Okay. Thank you. Cicely.
I would say be patient in the learning process, that students learn differently. It takes time. Sometimes it's messy, and all of that is okay, especially this year when things have been so different. But even next year when things should probably be still a little different, just to remember that that this is challenging work, and we need your patience, we need your support, and we need your flexibility.
Thank you. You?
Just simple, a nice thank you. That's it.
Okay. David.
Remember that we love your kids. That's why we're here.
Okay. Thank you. Jessica.
My message is not to families or students or staff. My message that keeps coming to mind is to the SEAs or state agencies, policymakers, General Assembly, that we need support and really try to be thoughtful and mindful of those supports that you believe that you're giving, and how in most instances it's actually creating more and difficult work for us.
Okay, thank you. Nanette?
Gosh, there's so much that you want to say, but I think one of the things that I would say to parents and families is that I don't know what normal is ever going to be again. And there are some systems that we have changed to and altered that actually has, I think, improved the way we do things. Really looking at curriculum and having some deliberate abandonment of what is working and what isn't, and being really thoughtful in what we're delivering to kids. Somebody at one point in time had referenced COVID as a wildfire. In the West, we get a lot of wildfires that come through and burn our forests out, and where it's devastating and it leaves debris and it leaves some residue. The beauty of nature that comes after that is amazing. And I think the same is going to be said about education if we choose to look at it that way. COVID was messy, is messy, it's ugly, lots of mistakes were made, but I think there's just some amazing, beautiful things that are going to stick, that's going to make our profession even better. And just to have some grace and some patience that we're doing the very best that we can. All of us, teachers, administrators, superintendents, our custodians, everybody that works in the profession is doing the very best we can to provide that learning environment for scholars in a very difficult time. So just recognizing normal is nothing but a cycle on your washing machine. We don't know that it's ever going to come back to whatever normal might be in education, but that doesn't mean it can't be amazing.
You need to patent that. That was a good one. Thank you. Tanya.
I think that the one thing that I would say to families would be, please just know that and express that that we love your children. We're doing the very best we can, and it's a learning process. And every day we're trying to do better for your child because it matters.
Thank you. Jeuné?
I would say keep communication lines open. Ask, questions. Ask how you can help. Listen and just support. I think the biggest thing is that, we all have to understand that it's difficult for all of us. And if we can just communicate and support, I think we can, like Nanette said, beautiful things will come out of this.
Thank you. Jason?
First, I would echo a lot of what everybody has already said. I would add to have everybody sort of remember viscerally how much we were able to quickly change education when there was a shared sense of urgency and political will and investment. And that was in response to the pandemic of COVID-19, but so many kids in America, certainly here in Richmond, are facing all kinds of other pandemics in their daily lives that we haven't organized ourselves to eradicate. And so it would be kind of remember what we did and hold on to that to try to keep doing that for the pandemic of poverty and racism and gun violence and all the other things that existed before COVID and will exist after COVID. But I think the last year showed us in the course of 1 year, we could go from a basically technologically antiquated system to a one-to-one system. So I don't want to ever hear again, it's not possible, or there's not enough money, or not enough time, or the issues are too intractable. I just don't believe it. I think the last year has proven that if we truly, we the adults, care enough, we can change the course of history in public education. And I think it just comes down to, do we want it enough?
Thank you. Well, David, Superintendent David, thank you so much for sharing with us the picture that you have. Thank you for reminding us that some of you have to hear from the state, but you also have to negotiate with your unions. We have right to work states 9. And so that's an aspect of negotiation we often forget. So thank you for reminding us. Cecilia, thank you so much for talking about the importance of manipulating and holding and moving, particularly for the subject that you have, because we're thinking that some of this is all visual, but in fact, some of it in fact requires some hands-on work. Yoon, thank you for sharing with us about your decision at an IB school to move forward with assessments, but also toward the end to say, but even with the assessments, we have to rethink how we do it for often high-performing students who are in IB programs, who we often overlook in situations like this because we assume they're going to be fine. I want to thank you, David, for sharing with us what your families had to do, lost jobs with students having to step in, but in a unique way, the internet or technology provided an opportunity to kind of do both and bringing up the importance of working with students with IEPs. Jessica, thank you again for opening up your story about the students you work with, the moms. Also, we're talking about incarcerated students. There's an entirely different conversation we could have had about the juvenile justice system and those who are involved. But thank you for also reminding us when we say we the people, we're also talking about the elected officials and the trickle down aspect, which aren't always supportive in the ways that teachers would like to see it. I want to thank you, Nanette, for saying, yes, our school decided to move forward with assessments, to look at it, to own, hey, I guess we made some great gains here, some challenges here, but reminding us that normal as we know it is more likely going to be something we can dial on a washing machine than in real life, but being upbeat about it. Tanya, same thing, big, you got a system, but you brought in the rural dynamic and the fact that you had to transition jobs in the middle of all of this and having to deal with what takes place in your areas. Thank you for that. I also want to thank you, Jeuné, for reminding us that in the Virgin Islands, of course, we hear the Virgin Islands, we think of sun and fun and overlook the fact that even before a pandemic, you had nature calling and the impact that it had on families and homes and a loss of electricity for 6 months and then welcome pandemic and yet having the tenacity and the foresight to move forward in that area. And Jason, I want to thank you for reminding us about political will. There's a scholar, many years ago, I think it was Dr. Ron Edmonds, who said that we know pretty much all that we need to know to do what we need to do to help children in poverty and to help children who are challenged. And he said, this isn't a knowledge problem. At some point, this is a political will problem. And for reminding us that in a matter of 365 days, we were able to shift on a 100-year-old plus system to one that looks more like the 21st century that we all want our children to live in. So thank you for that. And with that, I want to thank again those of you who will watch and listen. My name is Gerard Robinson, Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies and Culture Foundation here in Charlottesville, Virginia, and also the one who gets a chance to ask questions, but listen to really good people give us ideas on in character. So with that, thank you, everyone, and have a great day.